By 9:20 a.m., New York City was no longer a functioning metropolis. It had become an emergency zone. Smoke poured from both towers, casting a dark shadow across lower Manhattan. Streets filled with ash, dust, and terrified civilians running in every direction. Sirens echoed endlessly, blending into a single overwhelming roar. Inside the towers, chaos unfolded floor by floor. Stairwells clogged with thousands of people trying to escape. Some carried injured coworkers, others struggled to breathe through smoke-filled hallways. Firefighters fought their way upward, climbing dozens of flights in full gear, knowing the danger, yet refusing to turn back. Their radios crackled with broken messages, collisions, explosions, fires, but none yet understood the full scale. Across the East Coast, federal agencies mobilized. The FAA grounded every aircraft in American airspace, an unprecedented move. Pilots were ordered to land immediately, no matter where they were. Airports scrambled to redirect thousands of flights, while air traffic controllers worked frantically to identify which planes were hijacked and which were safe. In Washington, D.C., confusion began turning to alarm. Reports flooded in. 2 planes into the towers, 3 more missing from radar, multiple hijackings. Secret Service agents moved quickly, evacuating federal buildings. Streets around the Capitol and White House were cleared as security forces braced for further attacks. At the Pentagon, staff watched the unfolding disaster on live news feeds. Phones rang nonstop, some calling from New York, others reporting suspicious aircraft. No one realized that danger was minutes away from their own doorstep. Back in New York, emergency responders established command posts near the towers. Fire chiefs organized attack lines, medics treated the wounded on street corners, and police guided civilians away from collapsing debris. Yet every passing minute made the situation more volatile. The fires raged uncontrollably. The steel inside the towers began to weaken. Time was running out. By 9:25 a.m., the city's communication network began to overload. Cell towers jammed, making calls nearly impossible. First responders relied on failing radios to send updates. News stations aired live images, broadcasting the unimaginable to millions across the nation. Inside the towers, some survivors reached the ground and emerged into a landscape they did not recognize. Darkened by smoke, littered with burning debris, filled with the screams of those still trapped above. Others remained stuck on upper floors where stairwells were destroyed. Their calls to loved ones carried the raw emotion of people fighting for their final moments. The nation now understood. This was a coordinated attack on the United States, but the full scale had yet to strike, and the next blow was moments away. At 9:37 a.m., while the nation watched the burning towers in horror, another tragedy struck. American Airlines Flight 77, a Boeing 757 hijacked minutes after takeoff, slammed into the western side of the Pentagon at full speed. The explosion tore through the building, sending fireballs into the sky and collapsing a massive section of the outer ring. Inside, military personnel were thrown off their feet. Walls crumbled, smoke rushed through hallways. Some escaped through shattered windows. Others found themselves trapped in rooms filling with black, toxic fumes. For the first time in modern history, the heart of America's military command had been hit. Emergency crews in Washington, already stretched thin, now faced a second catastrophic scene. Firefighters raced toward the Pentagon through thick smoke, unsure how many had survived. Police closed highways as medical teams set up triage zones on the surrounding lawns. Within minutes, helicopters began evacuating the wounded. Back in New York, the situation deteriorated further. At the base of the towers, fire chiefs realized the structural damage was far worse than expected. The fires were feeding on jet fuel, office materials, and oxygen rushing through shattered windows. Temperatures inside exceeded 1,000 degrees. Steel beams, never designed to withstand such heat, began to soften. At 9:45 a.m., the FAA made an unprecedented announcement. All airspace over the United States was officially closed. Every civilian aircraft had to land immediately. Hundreds of pilots made emergency descents at the nearest airports. Air traffic controllers, their voices shaking, worked to confirm that no additional planes were hijacked. Across the nation, panic began to spread. Schools went into lockdown, government buildings were evacuated, crowds formed around televisions in offices, homes, and stores, watching the disaster unfold live with a growing sense of dread. Inside the South Tower, firefighters continued their ascent, fighting exhaustion as they climbed floor after floor. Civilians descended past them, some crying, some coughing, some silent and in shock. Every face told a story of survival, but at 9:58 a.m., the unthinkable happened. The South Tower began to buckle. At first it was subtle, a tremor felt only by those inside. Then windows shattered, steel groaned, a deep rolling rumble echoed through Manhattan, and at 9:59 a.m., after standing proudly for nearly 30 years, the South Tower collapsed. A giant cloud of dust and debris exploded outward, rushing through the streets like a tidal wave. Civilians ran blindly as the world around them turned to darkness. Firefighters and police were thrown to the ground. Command posts vanished under the avalanche of concrete and steel. For a moment, it seemed the city itself disappeared. The world watched in stunned silence. Millions realized simultaneously nothing would ever be the same again. The collapse of the South Tower sent shockwaves across the nation, but the horror was not over. New York stood in a cloud of dust, sirens drowned beneath the roar of falling steel, and yet another crisis was unfolding in the sky. At 10 a.m., high over the rural fields of Pennsylvania, passengers aboard United Airlines Flight 93 were beginning to understand the truth. News calls from loved ones revealed what the hijackers never expected them to learn. The towers had been hit. The Pentagon had been hit. They were next. Passengers whispered urgently, exchanging shattered pieces of information. Some cried, others prayed. And then a decision began to form, not out of panic, but out of courage. If they did nothing, thousands more would die. Their plane was heading toward Washington, D.C. Todd Beamer's quiet, steady voice was heard by an operator. He ended with words that would echo across history. "Are you guys ready? Let's roll." As they prepared to fight back, on the ground, the situation in New York grew even more desperate. The North Tower, already burning for over an hour, showed signs of severe structural failure. Firefighters who had survived the South Tower collapse regrouped, covered in ash, faces streaked with tears and soot. Many of their colleagues were missing. Some knew, deep down, that they might not make it out. Inside the North Tower, conditions were catastrophic. Heat intensified with every minute. Stairwells above certain floors were completely severed. Thousands remained trapped, staring through broken windows as flames advanced behind them. For those on the upper floors, rescue was no longer possible. At 10:03 a.m., in the skies above Pennsylvania, passengers aboard Flight 93 launched their desperate counterattack. They rushed the cockpit, fighting the hijackers hand to hand. The plane rocked violently, veering off its course. Struggling for control, the hijackers crashed the plane into an empty field near Shanksville. Everyone on board died, but the intended target, likely the U.S. Capitol, was saved. Back in New York, firefighters inside the North Tower reached the lobby, trying to regroup, when they heard an unmistakable sound. A deep, thundering groan from the core of the building. Seconds later, radios crackled desperately. "The tower's coming down! Get out of here!" At 10:28 a.m., after standing for 102 minutes, the North Tower collapsed. The ground shook as a second enormous cloud engulfed lower Manhattan. Streets disappeared. Skyscrapers vanished behind ash and smoke. Survivors stumbled through darkness, unable to see more than a few inches ahead. Some held onto strangers, others crawled, guided only by instinct. The skyline, once dominated by the Twin Towers, now stood empty. Emergency responders, exhausted and covered in debris, pushed forward again. They formed human chains to search through ruins. They screamed names, praying for answers. But communications were failing and chaos swallowed every street. Across the country, Americans gathered around televisions, radios, computers, frozen, shocked, grieving. The nation had been attacked at its heart, and the full magnitude was only beginning to emerge. While New York lay in ruins, Washington, D.C. braced for chaos. The Pentagon smoldered from the devastating impact of Flight 77. Smoke and fire engulfed the western side of the building. Emergency personnel rushed toward the burning sections, dragging the wounded from shattered hallways. Inside, offices were destroyed, phones were silent, and survivors huddled under desks or escaped through broken windows. On the streets surrounding the Pentagon, firefighters and medics established triage zones amid falling debris. Helicopters lifted injured personnel to nearby hospitals. Highways were closed as law enforcement struggled to manage panicked civilians and incoming first responders. Across the nation, NORAD scrambled fighter jets, tracking every airborne aircraft. Airspace was closed, commercial flights grounded. Pilots and controllers coordinated frantically to ensure no additional attacks occurred. Every moment was tense, every decision crucial. In New York, rescue efforts intensified. The dust clouds from the tower collapses blanketed the city. Streets were impassable, communication networks were overwhelmed, and first responders were exhausted but relentless. Volunteer civilians joined in the rescue, digging through rubble, searching for signs of life, and offering aid. Meanwhile, Flight 93's passengers had sacrificed their lives to prevent further destruction. In Pennsylvania, investigators and local responders combed the crash site, piecing together the courage and sacrifice of ordinary citizens who became heroes in those final moments. By late morning, the scope of the attacks was clear: thousands of lives lost, multiple sites devastated, and a nation under assault. Emergency centers across the country worked tirelessly to coordinate relief, track missing persons, and secure potential targets. The attacks had forever altered the American consciousness, revealing vulnerabilities and heroism in equal measure. Despite the overwhelming devastation, stories of courage began to emerge. Firefighters charging into collapsing buildings, civilians helping strangers, pilots and passengers making impossible choices. These moments would define the legacy of September 11th, 2001. The first hours had ended in chaos, fear, and loss, but they also revealed the resilience, determination, and humanity that would guide the nation through the days to come. By late morning on September 11th, 2001, the nation was in shock. New York City's streets were buried under dust and debris, emergency crews tirelessly combing through the ruins of Lower Manhattan. Hospitals were overwhelmed with injured civilians and first responders. Survivors stumbled through darkened streets, coughing, blind from dust, seeking safety wherever possible. In Washington, D.C., the Pentagon smoldered, and military personnel worked to secure critical areas. Roads were closed, and the city's government went into lockdown. Law enforcement coordinated evacuations, while emergency medical teams treated the wounded. Airspace over the nation remained closed, an unprecedented act, as fighter jets patrolled skies to prevent further attacks. Media outlets broadcast live footage across the country. Families watched in disbelief, desperate for news of loved ones. The reality of the attacks, combined with uncertainty about additional targets, created a nationwide atmosphere of fear and confusion. Schools, offices, and public transportation systems were shut down as Americans tried to comprehend the scale of the disaster. In Pennsylvania, Flight 93's crash site became a focus of grief and admiration. Local responders documented the bravery of the passengers, who had sacrificed themselves to prevent a potential attack on the Capitol or White House. Their actions became a symbol of courage amidst the chaos. Emergency response centers across the country coordinated relief efforts. Volunteers brought food, water, and medical supplies. Hospitals triaged patients, often improvising due to the overwhelming number of casualties. Communication networks struggled to function under the sudden surge of calls and messages. As evening fell, New York City began to grasp the extent of the loss. The Twin Towers were gone, thousands of lives lost or unaccounted for. Yet even in the midst of destruction, the resilience of the human spirit was evident. Firefighters, police, and ordinary civilians continued search and rescue efforts into the night, refusing to leave anyone behind. Across the nation, leaders addressed the public, offering reassurance, calling for unity, and beginning the planning of the next steps. Security protocols tightened, and the country prepared for a long, uncertain recovery. The first 24 hours after September 11th were marked by chaos, grief, and unprecedented mobilization. But they also revealed the courage, solidarity, and humanity that would guide the nation through its darkest hours.